Welcome to Lexus Revival Garage. My name is Mark, and today let's chat about what this channel is all about. I figured I would make a video just to kind of introduce the channel since we are just starting out and kind of describe the goals and reason why I decided to make a YouTube channel about aging Lexus vehicles. I love these cars. It is no surprise to anyone that these were some of the most reliable vehicles ever made, and it is not uncommon to see a 20, 30 plus year old Lexus on the roadway. And as we know, a lot of these cars, Toyotas included, have surpassed 500,000, even some have passed 1,000,000 miles. So these cars were really overbuilt. They were built to last forever. And I think there's something really special about that makes these cars really unique. You know, in a time period when a lot of other manufacturers were having to scramble to figure out how to make more reliable vehicles, Toyota had it figured out. Another reason why I really like these cars, particularly the vehicles, say like pre-2007, so mid-2000s and earlier, these cars have the smoothest engines and quietest engines I've ever heard to this day. I remember when I was 5 or 6 years old, my grandmother bought a 1994 Toyota Camry V6 XLE. It eventually ended up being my first car when I was in high school, just learning how to drive. But that car, I remember when I was 5 years old, she was backing out of my driveway because she was leaving to go back home, she and my grandfather. And I remember thinking, God, her car is so quiet. I can barely hear it. And I went up to her to say goodbye to her again, and I said, Grandmama, your car is so quiet. And she said, thank you. And I think, you know, as time has gone on, I almost wonder if that experience is what contributed to my interest in cars. Because I remember neighbors in that same neighborhood that also had Camrys, but they had the 4 cylinders. And they just weren't as smooth and quiet. And so I remember learning really kind of the differences, at least in sound, from a 4-cylinder versus a V6, you know, way back then. And so I think that was the first sort of introduction to cars for me. You know, the reason I say 2007, that's the cutoff time for a lot of cars that switched from, let's say, using the 1MZ or the 3MZ V6 engine, which was so smooth, so quiet, and just seemed so luxurious, over to the 2GR. Now, the 2GR, as we all know, is a legendary engine as well, and it's not a bad engine per se, but it doesn't have that level of smoothness and quietness. And I will even say, to some degree, the reliability is not quite that of the MZ series. And the same can be said for the V8s as well. Going from the UZ to the UR, the engines weren't as refined. They weren't as smooth. They weren't as quiet. And if you follow Lexus and Toyota, you know the issues that the UR engines have. Again, like the 2GR, they're not unreliable by any means. They're very good engines, but they just didn't have that level of refinement and, I'll say, perfection that the UZ engine had. Probably the biggest reason that I wanted to create a channel dedicated to these older Lexus vehicles is just the nostalgia factor. I lived in Houston, Texas in the early 2000s, like middle school and in high school for me. And of course, this is the time period in which I learned how to drive. I actually got my license in 2004. So I was learning how to drive when these cars were being manufactured. And I remember seeing them on the road all over Houston. I think that is also the nostalgia factor is probably the biggest reason why I love these cars, because they just bring back wonderful memories about a time when cars were just a lot simpler and I think a lot better. So I want to share my passion for these cars with the world and you guys on YouTube. Something really cool that happened last month is I actually got to meet the car care nut at the YouTubers and Coffee event just southwest of Chicago. And it was at that event where I started thinking maybe I could start a YouTube channel about fixing up these older Lexus vehicles. And so that's kind of what led us here today. A few goals I have for the channel as it's just starting out. I want to restore the Lexus vehicles I own to as close to like new condition as possible, but on a budget. And I know that can be hard to do sometimes, especially when I have a tendency to prefer using OEM parts in many cases. And depending on the type of vehicle, I think it's easier to get away with using aftermarket parts. Again, the goal is to restore these vehicles to almost a like new condition, but to do so without breaking the bank. One thing I can tell you we will not be doing on this channel is lowering cars. We will not be, slamming cars and putting them on airbags and, clapping them out. That is not my thing, and so that's just not something we're going to do here on this channel. But on the flip side, as much as I wish I could, we're not going to do the same level of restoration like the car care nut did with his 631,000 mile LS 430. Beautiful car. I saw it in person at that event last month. It was really cool to see an LS 430 in showroom condition again after all these years. It reminded me of going to the Lexus dealership in the early 2000s, right? But obviously that restoration cost him north of $60,000, and obviously I don't have the funds to do that, and these cars, they're not worth that anymore from a monetary perspective. So like I said, we're going to restore these vehicles to as close to like new condition as we can, but keeping on a budget. And I think that's in line with what most people probably want to see. So that brings me to the last topic we're going to talk about today, and that is I am in the process of obtaining the first project car for the channel. This is a vehicle, if the stars align, you'll probably see this vehicle unveiled in the next 1 to 2 weeks on the channel. The interior of this vehicle is in pretty rough shape, but mechanically speaking, the car seems to be really good. So I'm actually going to go tomorrow and take a look at it and potentially bring it back if all things work out. And we'll have a project car to work on, and I can tell you just by looking at the pictures and talking with the seller, we're going to have a lot of content to film on this car, and it's a cool one. It's a model that I never really thought I would have in the past, but for the price that I'm getting it for, I think it's going to be well worth it. So I know this video was different than what we've posted on the channel thus far, but I figured it would be a good idea to go ahead and film a video about what this channel is going to be about and sort of why I love these cars so much. And so I know it wasn't helpful or informative in any way in terms of a car repair perspective, but definitely subscribe to the channel because there's going to be a lot of content coming soon. Hope everybody has a wonderful day and take care.